Good morning, Ben. How are you?
G'day, Sally. Great to be talking to you.
Thank you. We're doing Chapter 7 today, Innovation, a long, hard but necessary road.
Can't wait.
Well, our first thing that I wanted to share with you was your intro around innovation is hard. It really is, because most people don't get it. Remember the automobile, the aeroplane, and these were all considered toys in their introduction because there wasn't anything else like it. It's a really interesting point there. And I think I was saying to you around the scooters, Ben, the Razor scooter, which is the best-selling scooter of all time, when it was first invented, the invention was for a transportation design, not for a toy, and it was pitched to be put in the back of your boot, and then you would park and then scoot to the location, whether it was a train stop or a restaurant or wherever the last part of the journey was that you were going to go, where parking was going to be difficult. This invention was designed to be compactable and used for that. But as it was pitched to companies like Mercedes and not understood that the market wasn't going to accept it, it got defaulted to being a toy, and within 6 months was the best-selling toy in America and became Toy of the Year in the year 2000. And now today we've got those toys turning into electric scooters. So the change has taken 20 years for that to happen, and particularly here in Australia. We were just chatting about how in Melbourne we're not really seeing a lot of scooters, but over in Queensland you are.
Certainly in Brisbane, Sally, they've taken over.
Yeah.
As I said, we had an initial romance, if you like, with bikes and bikes being everywhere, and that just didn't fly. And then overnight, about maybe 2 years ago now, scooters were introduced, and they just seem to multiply like rabbits. And now, we walk out of our apartment door in the morning onto Grey Street, and it's extraordinary. I mean, there'll be 2 scooters parked in the middle of the footpath. People have just got off them and walked off and done whatever so they're everywhere, and it's become a real thing. But, coming back to the whole innovation thing, that's an innovation that's kind of obviously captured the market in a way. But, innovation is a long, hard and necessary road. I mean, there is no easy steps. I've worked on multiple innovations over a long period of time. And, from conception, from idea to conception to implementation, depending on the nature of the innovation and the place in the value chain where it fits, it can take anywhere from 5 weeks to 5 months to 5 years to 20 years. And very few innovations actually make it to market. I mean, if Shell Company, one of the leading companies in the world, I guess you'd have to argue, they had a program in place called Game Changer. So over more than 2 decades, they've received more than 10,000 idea submissions from more than 5,000 innovators around the world. And while that number sounds impressive, only about 10 ideas a year have enough credibility to reach the proof of concept stage. That's just 4% of the total ideas submitted. And even less, about 1% become a reality. Now, just think about that. 1% of innovative ideas actually make it to the market. I'm a little bit perplexed at times when I see, in times when innovation becomes fashionable, all of these consultants running around the place claiming to be experts on innovation, and you just wonder how it is that all of a sudden everybody becomes an expert at innovation. If only 1% of ideas in a company like Shell ever get to market, I mean, why would any more with less resources get to market? It's a really interesting conundrum.
It really is, because I suppose it's a matter of who's actually participating in the movement is also excuse me, an interesting element of innovation, and sometimes there's really good ideas, and a bit like the scooter analogy, they overnight it looks like they're taken up. So what was the tipping point in the market as to that became a necessity or socially acceptable or desirable in some way?
Yeah.
The market just decides, yep, we're going to jump, and one person flows, and then it all continues on.
It's, Australia's kind of played around with innovation over a long period of time, and we kind of boast to the world at times what an innovative nation we are. And, I think we need to be – I just think we're not nearly as clever as we think we are. I think our record, while we may be modestly competent inventors, our record at commercialisation of innovation is at best modest, and we need to take a long, hard look at just what it is we're talking about when we talk about innovation. Right now, they're talking about things like national innovation systems and more students studying STEM. CSIRO recently produced a document that argued that we're really just a nation of, I've just forgotten the word, it's got me.
Adopters?
A nation of adopters, yeah, a nation of adopters, yeah. And, what we're good at is picking off other people's ideas and implementing them here. It's not as if Australia's recognised as an innovative nation around the world per se. Even in Australia, only 49% of, less than 50% of our firms are actually innovative. And in most cases, most of them haven't introduced a new product to market in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
So, we're it is hard. I mean, I think there's no other way to say it, and but that's the reason.
With the products, Ben, it's almost like there's a race to the bottom there too. We're just adopting and chasing commodities rather than innovating for improved design and products that are actually fit for purpose for our Australian market.
Well,
it's adopting what people are using elsewhere.
Well, someone just said it to me. Look, yesterday I was having lunch with a guy who works in the IT industry, and he said, look, just recently they announced that Amazon over the next 2 to 3 years is going to have 25% of the Australian retail market. And he said, and we're celebrating that. We're saying what a good thing it is.
Yeah.
He said, do we understand what that means for Australia? And that means that a whole range of retailers will go out of business. That means that all of the money that Amazon make will go back to Amazon. So at two levels, we're at a disadvantage. We will get some cheaper products delivered quicker.
Yeah.
Maybe. And, I just think we need to think about some different questions when we're talking about the whole race to the bottom in terms of costs. Our whole system is geared at a level that means that we're driving everything to the lowest cost level. And that's fine, but there are consequences to that.
Yes, particularly like you're talking about Amazon and retail, and our economy being 80% in the service sector, and what percentage of that is in retail. I don't know the exact percentage off the top of my head, but I'd imagine it'd be a big element of it. And is that going to erode our retail sector the same way that we've just eroded manufacturing?
Well, 10% of our employed persons work in the retail trade, and it's 4% of our gross value added.
Thank you. Wow.
Look, it's worth thinking. I think when you come back to our industry structure, and maybe even that needs to be redefined because it's based on traditional industries. But we need to be able to think about it and say, well, what sort of an industry base do we want to have in Australia? Not this is what we've got and we have to stay with it. There's a whole range of new industries emerging. Ag tech, fintech, a whole range of those technology industries. So maybe they ought to be clustered in an industry kind of category themselves, instead of being bundled up in service industries. There's we need to be able to think about this stuff differently, and even that's a long, hard road. It would be innovative if we thought about it differently, but it's too hard to change the traditional mindset, if you like. We're all captured by the basic level of education that we had. So the accountants think about everything through an accounting prism. The economists think about everything through an economic prism. The medical practitioners think about everything through a medical practitioner. So self-interest is predominates the thinking frames, instead of having something that works for us nationally that's multidisciplined. What we have is an economic paradigm or a financial paradigm or a technology paradigm. We don't have an Australian industry paradigm that says, well, of all of these industries, we really need to have 15% of them in manufacturing, and we need a whole range of them in education. And I mean, some of them stand up well, but maybe there needs to be a whole technology grouping there. The whole digital is taking over, but we don't seem to have a digital industry. It's all subsumed everywhere else. And I mean, I'm just thinking out loud in some of this stuff. I mean, it becomes, as we go through the conversation, it just forces me just to think a little bit harder about how things are working. And
this is making me think. This back to that Amazon comment that you made me think about. In the last podcast, I mentioned that Victorian government was spending $5 million to help small to medium businesses with digital adaptation and technology. And you think, well, how many of them are going to move to a very obvious idea of a digital adaptation for e-commerce, e-shops, and then that might end up being, we'll put things on Amazon. So the funding as a second order effect ends up defaulting money overseas because then they link their supply chain to it's just so easy to put something on a service provider like that. But where's the prosperity benefit to Australia?
Well, and I think that raises that raises a really big issue with everything to do with Australia. I mean, I know the Australian government thinks about it, but how well they do it is preference given to Australian firms, and having as part of our language a conversation about retained economic value or retained economic benefit. If you give business to an Australian firm, not only you might be paying a bit more, but there's a whole lot of retained value for Australia in that decision. And I mean, even with R&D, we could start to do things like that. Sort of start to think about the framework, the evaluation, decision-making evaluations in a different way. Instead of lowest cost being the driving factor, maybe retained economic benefit to Australia would be another criteria we could look at when we think about making industry and business decisions. The ultimate consumer. I mean, I know, there are times when I've gone into shops and I haven't thought about it and I've finished up buying a Chinese product. But if you ask the question, am I willing to pay, $500 extra for a fridge because it's made not in China? If it was made in Australia, I might. Now, I'm in a position where I can do that. Not everyone can, but maybe if we thought harder about that stuff, we could restructure our industry thinking to allow Australians to participate more in making those decisions.
Yes.
I just wonder if we're not kind of cutting off. We've emasculated manufacturing in Australia, primarily to be a low-cost producer. But at the same time, we've made no effort to be globally competitive, and I'm aware of, at anything. And we certainly don't benchmark well against anyone in the world against any criteria. So wouldn't it be innovative if we'd actually paid attention to these things?
Yeah, which I do think there has been more thought and conversation being put into Australian-made, like what we were just talking about, Australian-made products, and shopping local, and what the supply chain footprint looks like. Because I think we can't really unsee what a lot of people have just realised with supply chains, and I think that there's a nice link in with buying local and buying Australian-made that links into sustainability and the environmental footprint as well, that people are bunching those ideas together because they're part of their values, that if something is local, therefore it has a smaller footprint. People are talking about having Zoom meetings because, well, why would you get in the car? Not only because of the travel, but why would you add to pollution by driving your vehicle when you're already you can have a meeting effectively via Zoom. So there are different thought processes, but if that actually then transfers into how we actually building national wealth and wealth creation and prosperity for Australia, well, that's taking it to another level again.
And I think, just picking up on that last point, it's almost the notion of creating national wealth. I'd have to say, I've never heard that conversation in my lifetime in Australia. To my knowledge, I've never ever heard people talk about the creation of national wealth. Somehow it's a dirty word, or we don't understand it. The best we can come up with is being productive. And, we have to increase our productivity. And in recent years, we've been apparently at best stagnant, if we're not going backwards. For some reason, wealth creation is a dirty word. And maybe that's because there's a whole lot of wealthy people in the world who are bloody controlling things. But it's the only way you can have a prosperous society is if you have a vibrant wealth-creating system in your country. And that wealth creation system in every country that I know of is business. Now, then the question becomes, who controls business? And that's an ongoing debate. So in America, you've got 5 or 10 or 20 people who seem to control all the businesses. Well, I mean, that's a function of what we allow happen. They're about choices we make.
Yeah.
And but we just don't have these conversations. I mean, we're more interested in having royal commissions into some of the things I mentioned before. Now, all of which are important. But, why couldn't we have a royal commission into prosperity in the future?
Yeah.
That'd be a really novel thing to have a conversation about. And to think about what are the possibilities? Why couldn't we have a commission for the future that actually thinks about, that's bipartisan, multi-sector, that actually talks about Australia in 50 years' time? What's Australia's place in the world? What industries will drive our prosperity over the next 50 years? Issues around competitive advantage and solving our competitive disadvantages. I often chuckle about the, water has been an ongoing problem in Australia, certainly since I was a boy and certainly since we were settled. But we've done nothing to fix it. Now, Israel, when they were started in only 70 years ago, they had water as a major problem, but they now lead the world in agricultural irrigation systems. And I think I read that in some places in Israel, the desert is receding. Now, we got lots of desert out there.
Yeah.
why aren't we doing something? Instead of just saying, well, it's dry, arid land and it's unsuitable for anything. Israel was a desert. So, I do think we lack imagination in Australia. We're, as one writer said, we're a problem-solving people. We like just to solve problems, and the problems are right in front of us here and now, so we fix them. And it kind of equates with George Orwell's simplistic quote that says it's easy to see why men enjoy chopping wood.
Yeah.
We're not given to having big dreams, or we're not given to taking big positions around issues of importance.
No. I was thinking this morning, this is a random thought, Ben, but I was thinking about, popped into my mind, maybe in the future, the land in Australia is going to be the most valuable land in the world, because we're really becoming one of the healthiest nations in the world, or countries in the world. And if there are further pandemics and other situations, if we are absolutely supreme at locking our borders and bringing in international people and having quarantine facilities in the middle of the country, or Western Australia, or far north Queensland, or whatever, and we can actually secure that people are healthy. You are healthy if you're in Australia. That's going to drive a desire for people to want to either live here or own property here. I was very much futuristic, thinking, oh, okay, there's some global pandemic and people are just going to quickly come over on their aeroplanes. They're going to land in not a non-government airport, and then they're going to go out to these private places in quarantine, and then they're going to go and live in their properties in Australia until the pandemic passes in the country of their choice, and then they'll go back home.
Well, dare I say,
it will become like a luxury Alcatraz.
Well, dare I
and isn't that how we started?
Well, Bill Ferris, when he wrote the innovation report in 2017, talked about a moonshot for a mission for Australia as being the healthiest country in the world. Now, when he wrote that, he probably wasn't thinking about pandemics. But as you've described, we are, as it turns out. We've turned out that because we're an island, we have, would you suspect, you might even call it a competitive advantage, because we're an island, and we can close our borders, and we can, assuming modestly competent management, we can almost guarantee people will be healthy in Australia. Now, why wouldn't you go to the 10 most attractive businesses in the world for industries that we want to be great at here and say, why don't you move your headquarters here?
Yeah, absolutely.
But only allow them to move their headquarters here if they go and build headquarters buildings in Central Australia or Northern Australia. The condition that they come here is that they build in somewhere between the Ord River and Cairns. Now,
and we do tax them appropriately.
Appropriately. We do the appropriate incentives to get them here, but then they whack them when they get here. I mean, why wouldn't we do it? I mean, it just seems to me we have this huge, for a window of time, we have a huge advantage. And, I mean, some of these